for me, it was having mentors that sort of cared about my life and not just my career. I also, it's been important to me to sort of enjoy the journey.
Welcome back to the Faculty Factory podcast, friends. I'm Kim Skorupski. Well, we're in the Triple H series, the Habits and Hacks from Hopkins. And on today's episode, we have Dr. Eric Bass. Eric, how you doing?
I'm doing great today. Thanks, Kim.
Well, thank you for being on the podcast, Eric. Why don't you start by telling everyone, who in the heck are you and what do you do at Hopkins?
Well, that's a good question. So it reminds me that I originally came to Hopkins in 1987 to do a 2-year fellowship in general internal medicine and ended up staying a little longer than planned.
I was just going to say, you have looked at a calendar recently. You do realize that we're not in the 80s anymore, right?
Yeah, I think that the 2-year plan went out the window a long time ago. So ended up enjoying Hopkins, to be honest, far more than I ever originally had anticipated, and loved the division of general internal medicine, which is where I've been. And because of my interest in research and education at the interface between medicine and public health, I quickly learned that Hopkins was probably the best place in the world for doing work at that sort of interface. And so that has been a major factor in why I'm still here after all these years.
I love it. I hear that story a lot. It's not uncommon to hear that. I just kind of stopped here, a little way station, pulled off for a minute, was going to be here a heartbeat. And then lo and behold, Zoom, life happens. And you think, oh my gosh, this is the longest rest stop I've had. And a lot of people we just love it here and really kind of hunker down. What is your area of your training and your practice and your research specialty again? Can you go a little bit more detail?
Sure. So I'm a general internist and I hold a position. I'm a professor in the Department of Medicine. I have a joint appointment in the School of Public Health in Health Policy and Management and Epidemiology. I lead a research center. It's our evidence-based practice center. I've been involved in leadership at that center for, I think, 23 years now. And I've also been very interested in medical education most of my career. Got involved with the curriculum development program at what was then Francis Scott Key Medical Center, now Bayview. Have been teaching in the medical school for the last decade or so, leading the Foundations of Public Health course, co-directing the Scholarly Concentration course, or Concentration in Public Health Research. And most recently, in the last few years, became sort of vice chair for faculty development and promotions for the Department of Medicine, and have really enjoyed that role working with faculty in our department.
Well, what a rich background, and I love hearing how you've expanded your reach and your expertise. And personally, you played a really important role in my getting promoted to professor. And I remember at Dr. Gail Daumit's celebration when she became a professor, you were kind enough to have a little conversation with me one-on-one, encouraging me. I didn't do well the first time around. And so I was a little dejected, and you gave me a lot of encouragement and support and said, I'm looking forward to your packet going in again. This is going to happen. Don't give up. You're doing great things. People, really respect what you're doing. So you had a lot to do with my getting promoted. So on a personal note, I want to thank you for that. And so, yeah.
Well, you're welcome. And it's the fun part of the job is seeing people be successful in getting promoted. So,
amen. So everybody, you're wondering, well, what is Dr. Bass going to share with us today on the Habits and Hacks from Hopkins? And it has to do with his gut. His gut, he didn't say he was a gastroenterologist. This is not the gut microbiome per se, but it does have to do with what Eric was thinking about and going with gut instinct. So why don't you share your stories, Eric?
Well, sure. I have decades of experience at Hopkins now, but there's a few seminal moments, I think, where I felt that paying attention to my gut really made a difference in the subsequent sort of course of my life and my career. And the first one sort of comes to mind was when our son was born. I was a junior faculty member at that time, had been on faculty just for a few years, and I wanted to take paternity leave. Well, back then, there was no school of medicine policy on paternity leave. I'm not even sure they had much of a maternity leave policy back then, to be honest, although it was sort of more standard for women to take time off, but I'm not sure that many men had ever sort of requested that. And about the same time, I had a great opportunity to be the principal investigator on a major grant to conduct a big multi-center trial. Actually, it was on the value of preoperative testing for cataract surgery, and related to some collaborative work I'd been doing with colleagues in ophthalmology. And I made the sort of difficult decision at that time to go ahead and take the leave, even in the absence of a formal policy. I was fortunate to have a mentor and division director who were fine with my doing that. But I had to decline the opportunity to be the PI on the grant. In retrospect, it ended up being one of the best decisions I ever made. Even though the trial was funded, it ended up being published in the New England Journal of Medicine with another colleague as the PI and first author. I did have the opportunity to be part of that team, so I still was able to contribute, to the work. But I might have had a somewhat, different role if I had made a different decision. But on the home front, that extra early time that I had with my son, I think really helped strengthen my bond with him in ways that would not have occurred otherwise.
Wow.
And even when I made the decision, I wasn't even quite sure what to expect. But now that he's about ready to turn 28, I think back and think that was one of the best decisions that I made. And that was really based on what I felt in my gut that I wanted to do, even if it might have meant sort of slowing down the pace of my career trajectory toward promotion.
Wow, so courageous. And as you mentioned, perhaps at that time, 28 years ago, a bit non-traditional. And could you just set the stage for folks listening, put this in perspective? 28 years ago, at what stage were you in your career specifically? Where were you in terms of your rank, your seniority, if you will, and how many other grants or approximate number of papers? Give folks a sense of I'm there, or I will be there, or I was there, or kind of put it in context.
Well, I was an assistant professor, had been an assistant professor probably for just a couple of years at that point. I was originally joined the faculty after fellowship as an instructor and then became an assistant. So it was still pretty early. I had a long way ahead of me on the promotion track. I had some, first author papers at that point. As a generalist, my work was going in sort of different directions. It wasn't all as focused as what you might see in the CV of many sort of specialists. So I was still sort of, trying to find my way, the best ways to focus the work. At that point, I was really doing health services research, or what was called outcomes research at the time, and had been involved in some big projects as sort of in a collaborative sort of role. I had colleagues telling me, it was really important to be a PI on a big, federal grant, and it's, a great opportunity, to be the lead on a big trial that'll influence practice. And I had a mentor that sort of, was, supporting me and having sort of a prominent role in that project. Now, it's also possible that, I wouldn't have ended up at the PI anyway. A dear colleague ended up as the PI, and somebody that I still work with, and he did a great job leading the project, and maybe it was better for everyone that it sort of went that way. Hard to know where it's going to go, when you're at that early, somewhat sort of insecure stage of your career.
Exactly. I mean, I'm reflecting on all the early career faculty members that, we work with in the Office of Faculty Development through our various leadership courses and seminars and programs. And I know that you mentor. I'm trying to put myself back in your shoes 28 years ago as an assistant professor. on a scale of 1 to 10, like how scared were you of like, am I really messing up here? Am I blowing it? I mean, here I am at Hopkins, multi-center trial. This is huge. Am I literally walking away from what could be my career, a career-making move? I'm having a hard time thinking of if I had a faculty member come up to me and say, Kim, oh my gosh, here's a situation, I'm thinking like walking away from this. I kind of might be nervous going, oh, maybe you don't want to take a paternity leave right now. Can you do the grant and like take maybe when he's a year or 2 years old or when he's like 18? I mean, how do you get over that fear? You have to have some people telling you, Eric, man, are you nuts? How did you overcome that?
Well, I think I was really lucky to have great mentors. So my immediate mentor was Earl Steinberg, who's no longer at Hopkins, but I think he was the first general internist to be promoted to professor at Hopkins.
Oh, wow.
And my division director at the time was David Levine, who everybody at Hopkins knows as a fabulous mentor. They both, I give them, I'm really grateful to them because they both listened to what I wanted to do and were supportive when I made that decision, even if, from a career standpoint, they, could see that, that there might change the course of my path a little bit. But for me, it was having mentors that sort of cared about my life and not just my career.
Right. The whole picture and putting things in context. So I guess what I'm feeling from this lesson of your first story about the gut and the value of listening to our gut is that there are, especially early in our careers, there will be ample opportunity. And if we're trained well, you get to this stage in life because you have perseverance and you're a hard worker and you have a great work ethic. And so there is this kind of moment of grace that we have to give ourselves, the folks that we mentor, and those who lead us, that there will be pivot points and decision points in life. And it's not necessarily all about career. I mean, it's put things in context. I mean, if you do your life and do what brings you joy, that door closing, the proverbial door closing, window opening kind of thing, it's going to work out. It's all going to work out. So I love that story. I know you have a couple more.
Yeah, so I guess another time that comes back to me was actually going back a little further now. Actually, it was a fellow. I mentioned that I came to Hopkins to do a general medicine fellowship. The fellowship was designed to be primarily to prepare people for careers in sort of public health oriented research, but definitely a research oriented fellowship. When I was a fellow, the faculty in the GM division at Bayview were just launching a new faculty development program on teaching skills and curriculum development that I was very interested in. And, although I had come to Hopkins to do sort of this research training, I was very interested in medical education, and I sort of wanted that to be part of my career. And I really wanted to participate in this program. And at the time, I was sort of, here I am, Hopkins, the land of research, and all the folks were really sort of advising me to concentrate on my research. It's really important to develop your own focused area of research interest, to be, prepared to sort of write grants and get yourself, established as an investigator, and that was sort of the path that I think most were following. But I sort of stubbornly persisted and really wanted to participate in this faculty development program. I ended up being a participant as a fellow in the very first cohort of that faculty development program, which you probably know is still running, decades later. That ended up yielding great dividends well beyond what I ever had sort of anticipated. I participated in both parts of the faculty development program. I subsequently ended up co-directing the curriculum development program for several years after that. Ended up being a co-author of a book on the 6-step approach to curriculum development, which maybe you've seen. Other authors, Dave Kern, Pat Thomas, and it's sort of passed on to other folks. I think it's now in its 3rd or 4th sort of edition, but I had a chance to help put together that first version of it. And, that I'm really sort of, proud of being part of that team, and seeing sort of a book that has really been used pretty widely. It's been translated into 3 other languages so far. And the publisher, keeps coming back to the group to, come out with sort of another edition. I haven't been so involved in the later editions, but I'm sort of proud of the role that I had initially. What I hadn't sort of anticipated fully was how much the expertise I developed in curriculum development created other opportunities for me subsequently. So I had a chance to get involved in a number of projects, involved collaborations with educators at other institutions. I felt like I had a special set of skills that I could bring to the table that complemented the research skills that I had, but also brought the educational sort of dimension to it. And, I worked with the Society of General Internal Medicine and the clerkship directors in internal medicine to develop what became the core curriculum guide for internal medicine clerkships. And there was a whole sort of series of work that we did that laid the groundwork for that, including some, surveys that we did using sort of the taking advantage of some of the research skills that I had learned and applying it to sort of educational topics. And then sort of, I guess, when I was sort of a mid-level faculty member, I think either I might still have been assistant professor or somewhere between that assistant associate professor. I had this sort of opportunity to apply to be the editor of the Journal of General Internal Medicine. It's the official journal, the Society of General Internal Medicine. I'd been a member of that society for much of my career at that point, and it seemed like a really neat opportunity. I sort of naively thought I'd have a shot at it. I didn't realize at the time that usually those positions go to very senior faculty, people with more experience than what I had at the time. But again, I was lucky to have good support from the division. My division director at the time was Mike Clagg. And Mike was great. He put the division support behind my application, actually contributed some divisional support to the application. And, I got lucky. They ended up, selecting me to serve as the editor for the journal. And I loved it. And how it ties back to the early decision is that, the journal is one that publishes both research and education. And here I was in a position that allowed me to use the experience, expertise I had developed as both an investigator and an educator. And I think it really, I'm not sure I would have been accepted for that position if I hadn't had that sort of combination of interests in it. And I think it certainly enhanced, my ability to sort of thrive in that role.
Well,
and
we talk about like serendipity. And so this is another one of those interesting stories where 2 things you said that kind of like struck me as one is you're incredibly humble when you said, I got lucky. Just kind of like they rolled the dice like, yeah, this guy will do it. It clearly was not luck, that you were situated perfectly. And that's what is fascinating to me, that here's another example of where you were advised to focus on your research, and yet there was a gut instinct and something that told you, despite some advice going, I don't know, you might really want to think carefully about participating in this curriculum development thing. I mean, what about your research? And you said, no, you know what? I really feel a tug here. So how did that calculation play out early on. Do you remember like the pros and cons side of that, or is this purely a thing of like, no, I really can't necessarily articulate it, but I feel, were you feeling a strong pull that I'm going to do this, and I don't know why, and then it, as we say, just by serendipity, it all worked out as meant to be. But how did you get to that, flipping that switch and go, no, I'm doing it?
Well, I think I was mindful that it was a bit of a risk, that whatever time I'd spent on the education side was less time that I would have, to be working on research, to be writing papers and, developing plans for grants. And, so it meant that I sort of had to accept the research side, perhaps going at a less brisk pace, I guess. But again, I think what made all the difference for me is I, again, had great people around me. And in this case, I got the chance to know and work with some great faculty over at what is now the Bayview campus. It was, then it was the Francis Scott Key in a building that actually no longer stands over there anymore. But I got, I worked with Randy Barker and Dave Kern and Donna Howard and Penny Williamson and, a whole group of educators, who were really passionately committed to medical education. And, they were sort of delighted that I had chosen to, I think, spend some time with them as a fellow. That was before we had a separate sort of track for fellows interested in medical education. So, the people around me sort of made it possible to, I think, take a bit of a risk and to take a little different path than what it probably, could have been a simpler path. Gotcha.
Okay. Wow. Good story. I know you have one more in your little kit over there.
Oh, yeah. I guess the fast forward now to the most recent sort of career dilemma I faced, which was actually just probably about 4 years ago now, a little over 4 years ago. The Society of General Internal Medicine, which I've been a part of my whole career, posted a position for a part-time CEO. They had always had non-physicians in their sort of executive leadership role, and they decided they wanted to recruit a physician, but due to the size and finance of the organization, they weren't sure they could afford to hire a full-time, physician to serve as CEO. So they had posted it as a, part-time position. That for, might seem a little crazy because, I called my brother early on. My brother's a CEO for a nonprofit organization in Boston, and he just sort of chuckled a bit and said, he wasn't aware of any CEO positions that were really part-time jobs. So he sort of warned me that it might be difficult to do. But again, I love the organization. I saw it as a great opportunity to, support people in academic general medicine at sort of a national level, and sort of give back to the organization that had, done a lot for my own sort of, career development. Again, this is the same organization that took a risk on me and, hiring me to be their journal editor.
Right.
So I talked to my, division director and department director, and, they were very good, listened, they're supportive, but I think also were, concerned that it might be difficult to sort of juggle two masters. Hopkins is a pretty demanding master, as you know.
Right.
There was also, the possibility that if I, continued sort of full time at Hopkins, there's a possibility that I would be, considered for an endowed chair, which, is sort of the, what we all often sort of dream about at night, in our academic careers, that, that light at the end of the tunnel that sort of, gives you that extra.
Feather in your cap, right? You have
just
five.
and the support and what it enables you to sort of do. And so, so now I'm sort of, having to weigh, does it make sense to do this, to complicate my life by trying to sort of take on a part-time role while, staying at Hopkins, and it meaning that I would, give up that opportunity to be considered for any kind of, endowed chair position. And, probably would have been, certainly would have been a simpler path to sort of, stay in a full-time role at Hopkins. But I, as I wrestled with it over several weeks, talked with several people, I just kept feeling, my gut or my heart, I'm not sure which one, but was tugging at me that, this is something I really wanted to do. I wanted to try it. It was sort of a challenge. A bit of it was a challenge coming, later in my career. And I felt like I had at least, another, in it for me to sort of pursue another, big challenge. And this just seemed like a good opportunity. So I ended up, applying for the position and was offered the position and became their first part-time CEO, physician CEO in, September of 2017.
Okay.
So I guess about 3.5 years ago. And, I've been, and it turns out, I have no regrets. I love, I love the organization. I love the people I'm working with. I'm working harder than probably I've ever worked in my career. I'm still trying to maintain what I do at Hopkins and sort of take on the CEO role for SGIM. So I'm working hours that are as long as they've been before. Sometimes people ask me, am I crazy? Why am I doing this? And and usually the core of my response is that I just feel really lucky to work for two great organizations. I mean, and I still believe, Hopkins is a great organization full of amazingly sort of talented people. It's hard not to be, motivated, each day when you see the people you get to work with. And SGM is very similar. People that have great talent, heart is in the right place. It's an organization that's deeply committed to a more just system of care. So that work has gotten me much more involved in the health policy and sort of advocacy world, and sort of advocating for policies that allow us to deliver, better care to the patients we serve and better support, primary care physicians who are sort of working hard to enhance the care that we deliver. So I find that that was one of the harder decisions I made. I feel like it was the right decision for me. Was again lucky to have folks that were willing to be supportive of following my gut.
Mm-hmm. Wow, you've said so much that's really so valuable, Eric, and I just kind of want to do a little summary here as I've been taking notes and thinking. So this, friends in the podcast, Dr. Eric Bass has been talking about going with your gut, and he shared with us 3 examples of a life choice about paternity leave, a choice around scholarship that essentially was going down an education path that was parallel to his research development, but kind of dovetailed at the end there through serendipity and ended up working out with, for him, obviously, with a curriculum development book and doing really well there. And then more recently, a CEO position leading, the International, Society of Will SGIM. So, and things you've said, Eric, throughout this was risk. You said the word risk at least, 3 or 4 or 5 times. And as you were talking, again, I always try to put myself in the shoes of our faculty members who may say, my gosh, how did he avoid some common thinking errors? Because a lot of us, when we are given opportunities at these decision points in life, there's a fear, understandably, about making a bad choice, making the wrong decision. And many of us can probably think of many times where we have made a misstep and we wish we could like have a redo. And so I'm curious if you could just share with us some, common elements or denominator or the point that you think made everything work out well. And I heard a couple of things, and as you're thinking, I'm sure you'll have something else, but you talked a lot about talking to other people. So these decisions, it doesn't sound like to me like they were impulsive, overnight, not really clearly thought out. I heard you say over and over and over again, I had great mentors. There were great people. You did a lot of information gathering, talked to a lot of people, and you also use the term wrestled with. I wrestled with, and for several weeks, which gives me, again, the impression that when we have these important decisions to make, we are ultimately our own, the captain of our own ships and our own destinies in large part. And we get a lot of information. We collect information the best we can. And then ultimately, you also said words like my feeling and my heart and my passion. And you speak about the desires and for justice. And so those kind of the parts of you, the character parts of you, to me, is my instinct is what you would tell someone in terms of the whole wrapping around to the beginning, going with your gut. So can you offer any kind of advice to someone who's thinking, well, good for him. The guy's obviously really smart. And I can see he's got that tattoo, no regrets, like in that crazy commercial where it's misspelled, no regrets, no regrets. You don't have any regrets. But how would you advise someone who is maybe very fearful of making the wrong decision and having a thinking error?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, as you sort of alluded to, it really helps when faced with these types of decisions to reach out to the people you trust. It's why it's so important to have at least, one, ideally more than one sort of mentor, someone with a little more experience you can sort of bounce things off of, and at least you're making informed decision. And, at least I felt like I, took the time and talked with folks, and I felt like I was making informed decisions. I was mindful of the risk associated with each. But I, in retrospect, I'm thankful that I wasn't sort of paralyzed by that fear or risk. And I think some of that comes from other parts of my life. I mean, I do have, my religious faith is an important part of my life, and I do, look to that as a sort of foundation to my approach to things. And so I at a certain level, I felt that, even if things didn't go as well as I might have hoped, that I was going to survive, that I'd adapt and find a way to sort of deal with it. And, maybe one or more of these decisions might not have worked out so well. But I feel I could have, probably could have adapted to that and adjusted. And some of that's just being willing to be flexible, being willing to sort of consider new opportunities or options maybe you hadn't considered before.
Yeah, resilient. I mean, you're definitely describing to me an innate confidence in your resilience, perhaps certainly shored up by the foundation of your faith. And also this kind of, again, this still confidence that, well, worst case scenario, I can bounce. I'll figure this out. You talk about this, that there's this resilience and this confidence that I'm going to bounce back. And also the thread in there through all your stories was that there's something in you, innate in you, that was a core value. So to me, it kind of gets to your values, that while you were very deliberative and thoughtful and mindful and had the conversations with informants who you trust, it sounds like you never really deviated far from your core values of who I am, your authenticity. So I guess I'm thinking of faculty members who may be afraid of making that mistake, is that maybe one pause point is reflecting on, well, what are my values? If I have a decision in front of me that, for all intents and purposes, a lot of people would objectively say, well, this makes a lot of sense, but it does not jive with your core values, or the cost of doing that may divert you from who you are or what's important to you, or say for whatever, in the season of life that you do have a young child, and it makes objective good sense to do this, but I then practically, I know that there goes, 3 years of life because my family will never see me. That kind of, when I think a decision point might be more easily managed if we remain mindful of, what are my values? What is most important to me? Who am I at my core? And be less concerned perhaps with the careerism of what would look good on a CV versus what will look good in my heart. And then when I open my eyes on the pillow every morning, and then at night when I put my head on my pillow. So, values to me is what I hear through your stories, that every decision point seemed to kind of come down to, who am I as a man, as a person, as well as a scientist and a physician, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's, I think the thing, taking time to sort of reflect on your core values is helpful. Mm-hmm. Interestingly, that was, I remember actually one of the things that was done in that curriculum, or that faculty development program that I mentioned at the beginning, they actually, one of the sessions was very much focused on, declaring your core values. Oh. And I actually remember some of those conversations that took place as part of that program. So yeah, I think taking time to sort of do that as you're planning your career, I think makes sense. Mm-hmm. And I think the other thing, as I was listening to you, it reminded me was just, I also, it's been important to me to sort of enjoy the journey. And I think sometimes folks get so focused on where they want to get to, that can sort of get in the way of sort of enjoying the journey along the way. And so I think if you're enjoying the journey, then to me, it doesn't, and it didn't really matter how long it took to get promoted to professor. Right. I was enjoying the journey. I felt like it would come eventually, but it was not, I was not one of those folks that felt I needed to be a professor by the age of, 35 or 40 or whatever. Yeah. And so I think making decisions that allow you to enjoy the journey, and if you enjoy what you're doing, then, I think at a place like Hopkins, that, your efforts will get rewarded and will be recognized.
That's right. Well, folks, this has been Dr. Eric Bass. Eric, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate your honesty and sharing your stories and insights and helping us all think through our careers, and as these decision points come in our life, and not forgetting that, our gut is a really important source of wisdom, and as well as the other traditional ways of us learning from everyone else and the data and as scientists, but then deep in our own guts, we kind of sometimes know what's makes sense for us. So any parting thoughts, Eric?
Well, I think you've captured it nicely. I appreciate your taking time to let me share a little bit with you and react to it.
Oh, well, thank you, Eric. Folks, I hope you spread the news about the Faculty Factory and join us next time on the Faculty Factory podcast. Thanks, Eric.
Thanks for tuning in to Faculty Factory Podcast. The mission of the Faculty Factory is to build and support a community of leaders in faculty development who share tools, resources, wisdom, and encouragement in service to our faculty members, schools, and institutions. We encourage you to go to facultyfactory.org to find out more. Get in touch with me, ask me any questions. Maybe you want to be interviewed on the podcast. Thanks for tuning in to Faculty Factory Podcast. We'll see you next time. The Faculty Factory podcast and website is sponsored by the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine Office of Faculty. For more information, visit facultyfactory.org.